From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Now I would like to have the honor of introducing our next speaker to you. My name is Tracy North, and I work in the Hispanic Division at the Library of Congress. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce Sonia Manzano to you this afternoon. I nearly fell out of my chair when I found out she would be at the festival this year. Maria from Sesame Street, as we all know her, has been a fixture in all our lives for generations. Well, did you know that she recently published her first novel, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano? The novel is intended for a young adult audience, but I truly believe that people of all ages would enjoy it. You may not know that Manzano created this original historical story by quite literally ripping headlines from New York newspapers in the late 1960s to tell the story of Evelyn Serrano and her abuela, who arrived from Puerto Rico and forever changed her life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for showing up and coming to hear me speak. I bet you all thought I was going to be at the PBS tent. Well, I'm not there because I feel like I've graduated. Actually, the show is still on, and I'm still on it. But after writing scripts for Sesame Street for many years and then I wrote 2 children's books, I decided to take the next step and write a young adult novel about a time that I thought was very exciting. It's, as you know, it's called The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, and it takes place in 1969 in a Puerto Rican neighborhood in New York City, also known as El Barrio. Now, in 1969, things were very exciting in America. The youth had risen and they were going to take over the world, and they were anti-establishment, and they decided to take over their universities, and they didn't like the way their colleges were run, so they took over their colleges, and kids protested the war in Vietnam, as you know, and the civil rights movement was fervent, and it was a whole cultural awakening, I think, at that time. Women were just joining the workforce for the first time, and they indicated their displeasure with society by burning their bras. I don't know if anybody was aware of that. If we did that now, we'd have to burn our Spankses, and I don't know that Spankses burn. I think we'd have to melt them now, but everybody was standing up for their rights and protesting, and even President Johnson at that time sort of said, okay, I give up. Let's have a new society, and he promulgated the Great Society, and it was the beginning of Head Start. Well, while all of this stuff was going on in the big arena, in this little community of El Barrio, in Spanish Harlem, a group called the Young Lords took over a church in order to bring attention to the fact that social services were not happening in that community. There was a lot of garbage in the street, and they wanted the garbage to be picked up. They were very idealistic, and they decided that they too were going to make a stamp. They were going to say something about society, and it was the first time that Puerto Ricans kind of came out of the margins of society. They wanted to stand up and be counted, and the young people were very idealistic, and it's interesting to me that they went around the community. They said, well, what should we do? What should we do? Should we free Puerto Rico from the United States? And the people of the neighborhood said, no, I think it would be good if they cleaned up the garbage around here. That was more important. So then they had something called the garbage offensive. They set the garbage on fire so that the sanitation department would come and clean up the streets. And then they took over a church. And all of those things happen, and if you want to know more about those things, in the back of the book, those events, in the back of the book, there's a list of all of the newspaper articles and how the New York Times covered it. Those things happened for real. But my book is a made-up story about how these events could have affected the lives of a young girl, a 14-year-old girl, Evelyn Serrano, her grandmother, and her mother. Her mother is very traditional, very afraid of the young lords, very afraid of change. The grandmother, however, is a fervent revolutionary person. She's a Puerto Rican nationalist and gets swept up in the fervor of the young lords, takes Evelyn Serrano with her, and Evelyn Serrano is caught in the middle, if she should side with her mother or if she should side with her grandmother. And she doesn't know what to do. And therein lies the drama and the rub. I'd like you to take a look at the cover here, and it's a wonderful cover of a hand kind of holding up, trying to cover the sky with her hand. And actually, that's a Puerto Rican expression, tapar el cielo con la mano. When people are in real denial of something, you try to cover it up with your hand. And it's like covering the sky with your hand. And actually, my father used to accuse my mother of that a lot. And I used to think it was just him. But it's not just him. It's kind of a saying, a Puerto Rican saying that many people know. And I think that this illustrator really captured it beautifully. I'll read a little bit from the book now. There's a Puerto Rican expression that says some people try to tapar el cielo con la mano, to cover the sky with their hand. That was Mommy. She was always covering up what she didn't want to see or putting something pretty on top of something ugly. The picture of her father on the dresser in her bedroom was another good example of Mommy's bad decorating skills. That thing had both roses and a tapete. Tapetes are little doilies that this mother was obsessed with decorating their awful tenement apartment. The fakeness of the plastic roses matched the fakeness of the photo. Like in all the old-fashioned pictures I had seen from Puerto Rico, the photographer had decided to make it better by coloring it in and putting lipstick and blush on Abuelo, whose thin little black mustache looked super stupid with all that makeup. Little did I know that Abuelo's life was my mother's ultimate act of tapando el cielo con la mano. Because later on in the book, we find out that her estranged grandfather was a National Guardsman who shot into a group of innocent protesters in Ponce in 1930. There was a famous event called the Ponce Massacre. So that's the grandfather that she's referring to. I wish Mommy would have just demanded that the landlord paint our apartment. Whenever I asked her about calling the landlord, she said, "We don't have to paint. We're not going to live here forever. Someday we'll buy a house in the Bronx." That's all Puerto Ricans' dream at that time, was to buy a house in the Bronx. Yeah, she did want to buy a house in the Bronx, but really, Mommy was too afraid of the landlord to complain. When it came to standing up for herself, she was just as frail and delicate as one of her tapetes. Since my room was off limits to Mommy's decorating and plastic roses and anything lacy, the walls were creamy beige. I had a corduroy bedspread that was once yellow but had been washed so many times it was faded to almost white, just the way I liked it. My bare dresser without a tapete on it stood in the corner, and a table I found on 110th Street served as a desk. I painted the dresser and the table white. With Mommy still in the kitchen holding her egg pan in one hand and her iron in the other, I got dressed. I was tucking my shirt into my A-line skirt when Pops busted into my room. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "You should be helping your mother." My stepfather had been acting super parental lately. I just looked at him. I want you to take out the garbage. If you can't help in the bodega, you can help more in the house. In Puerto Rico, a young girl knows her place, knows that she should help her mother. What are you, a hippie? Pops had an issue with hippies. Malcriados sinvergüenzas, shameless, spoiled kids, he called them. Before I could answer, my mother stepped in behind Pop, saying, "That's okay, I'll take out the garbage." My mother, the slave, was all I could think of. So she's very disappointed in her mother's behavior. She thinks her mother is too traditional, and she finds her grandmother very exciting. I'm going to read a little bit about the conditions of El Barrio at that time. El Barrio. Bang! The heat of the sun smacked my face the second I stepped out onto the street. I untucked my shirt and rolled up my skirt at least an inch. Mommy thought I was too young to wear miniskirts, and Pops didn't think it was right for any girl to wear them. Who cared what they thought? The daily sweats were about to begin, but the heat wasn't as bad as what hit my senses next. The El Barrio fart smell of garbage. With the hot sun beating down, food rotted even faster. The smells of the spoiled fish, melons, and beans blended together into one big funky mess that stunk like everybody had decided to cut loose some gas at the same time. I tried to walk with my nose up in the air so I wouldn't have to smell the El Barrio fart, but the only way to avoid it would have been to fly. So that's kind of a little bit of the conditions of El Barrio that the young lords had decided to remedy. I really enjoyed doing a lot of research, reading about the young lords, finding out, talking to them now that they're in their 60s, what they felt about those days. And they were so idealistic. I saw footage of them saying things like, "We want to free Puerto Rico from the United States and give oatmeal to all the children." I mean, these were the conversations that they were having at the same table. And I'm always intrigued by how young people think they can change everything and do everything and are very idealistic. And people always say, you know, these young kids don't listen to us. And I think it's a very good thing, because if they did, they wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. They'd just go back to bed and they'd say, "You're right, things are terrible, we're not going to fix it." But children do think they can fix things, and it's sort of the indignation of the youth that I find charming. I love to see Jane Fonda when they called her Hanoi Jane during the Vietnam War, and they thought she was so dangerous. And when you see her, she's like 20 years old. She's like giggling, and she's almost saying, "How could things be so bad? I had no idea that things could be so bad." So that's a little bit of what I try to get across in this book is that fervor and that idealism. And of course, Evelyn has to decide or learn that both her grandmother and her mother are good people, and that she could learn from both of them. And that's the gray area of life that a lot of us don't like to go to. Especially nowadays, where everything is black and white. Either you're with us or against us, or you like us or you don't, and it's just not that simple. Or this program is good or that program is not. People have to look and use a little bit of critical thinking about it. I enjoyed writing this because it was making up characters, whereas for Sesame Street, I know the characters, I know how Oscar's gonna be, I know how Big Bird's gonna be, so I could write stories about them easily. This was more challenging because I had to make up what Evelyn was like. People always say, like, is it really my story? It wasn't my story. I was 20 when she was 14 at that time, and I wanted to be in show business. But my grandmother did live on 111th Street and Lexington Avenue, and we used to visit her every Sunday. And I do remember El Barrio being this sort of really exotic. I'm from the Bronx, by the way. I'm the other famous Sonia from the Bronx. Me and Sonia Sotomayor, she's also from the Bronx, as you know. She's so cool, she makes living in the projects attractive, because that's where she lived. But I'm not from Manhattan. But whenever we went to El Barrio, it was like Puerto Rican Central, because there were people selling fried food out of push carts and you know, little snow cones and you know, you go by all the restaurants and there'd be pork rinds being heated by the heat of bulbs. It was all kind of really, really exciting for me to visit my grandmother, and she lived in a brownstone just like Sesame Street's brownstone, so there was a connection there. And by the way, in 1969 was when Sesame Street was first aired, so you know, it's another indication of what was happening in the country at that time. We were seeing kids in a different way, and so I really enjoyed writing it because it has a little bit to do with me, because I was in that area, and they were a little. I think they looked scary to the adults because they looked like Fidel Castro, because they wore the same kind of clothes that he wore, but they certainly were idealistic, I believe. So that said, I'd like to answer some questions. Oh, how did I decide I wanted to write? Well, after being on Sesame Street for about 10 years, I decided that I wanted to contribute more to the show. And I had questions about the Hispanic content. There were no Hispanic writers. There were no African-American writers. And so when I would question the content, finally the producer said, you know, why don't you try writing it yourself? And boy, did I do some backpedaling, because I had never written anything in my life. And the thing, you know, they would do a lot of cultural bits that had to do with food, the food that we ate and the music that we listened to. But cultures grow. They're not static like in a museum. Sherman Alexie said it really well, the Native American writer, when somebody asked him, do people in your tribe still adhere to their ancestral routines? And he said, well, it depends. Are you talking about Native Americans in the 30s or in the 60s or in the 80s? You know, culture changes. And that's what I wanted to do on Sesame Street. And she said, well, write some stuff yourself. And I was very nervous about it, because there was no writing or literature in my household. There were no books and there were no newspapers. And as a matter of fact, if you did curl up with a book, it was like you were doing something lazy. They'd say, get up and do something useful. Don't sit there and read the book. And I tell this crummy joke about how sometimes we were forced to write. We didn't have a pencil, so if we had to write down a telephone number, we'd use my mother's Maybelline eyebrow pencil. So there was no writing, and when this person said to me, write, if you don't like this, maybe you can write it yourself, I was very shocked, and it's to the credit of Sesame Street that they supported me in doing this. And I wrote a few bits, and I mailed them on the last day of the taping year. In case they were really horrible, we would have a few months to sort of get over the humiliation. And but they liked them right away, and I became a writer. So it was, you know, I was able to sort of have more power. All the power is behind the camera, not in front of it. Yep.
You said something about speaking to the 60-year-old activists, and can you talk about, were they willing, were they excited, or were
Yes,
they apprehensive?
They were. Well, I spoke to Juan Gonzalez, who is now a columnist for the Daily News in New York, and he was very excited. And he gave me a little blurb on the book where he talks about how excited he was to read this and how I, you know, made those times come back to life. And I spoke to Iris Morales, who was a young lord and then was the general counsel of Sesame Workshop in '69, and Pablo Guzman, who's a newscaster in New York City, So these people are still working, still activists, and it was, I was happy that they were able to speak to me and share their memories of that time. I'm sure they forgot a lot of stuff, but every 40 years or so they get together again at the church and reminisce.
I have two questions. Are there any authors here that you've met that you were excited to meet? And what made you choose Evelyn as the character's name?
Okay. I was very thrilled and excited to meet a young writer named Justin Torres. I loved his book. What was the name of it? We Were Animals? We Were
Yes.
Called? That's his book. And I was very happy to meet Juno Diaz. Because I really love everything he writes, and I was able to actually perform some of his material at Symphony Space. It's a place where I read stories. So those were two writers that I was happy to meet, and I was also happy to meet Sharon Flake, who wrote a wonderful book called The Skin I'm In, and that was the first. When I decided to write a young adult book, hers was the first that I read. To sort of give me an idea of the genre of, she's terrific. And so what was your second question?
What made you pick Evelyn as the character's name?
That's a good question.
It's a great name.
Sometimes names, like, they float around in your head if you're ever writing. My cousin, who lived with my grandmother's name was Evelyn. My grandmother's maiden name, before she was Manzano, was Serrano. So I just kind of I associate El Barrio with kind of those names, and it just seemed to be the perfect fit. In my picture book, one of my characters is Iris, because I had a favorite aunt named Iris, and that's how those things come about.
Well, thanks for doing that. That's my name, too.
Oh, Evelyn? Yes. Oh, I see.
Hi.
Hi.
Did you have to go through was it a big step to you, like, to go from being Maria or writing about, picture books, which were more somewhat still at the Sesame Street level in a sense, but now here you went to a young adult novel, practically, and you had to use your different language than you'd write, and be a different character, basically, certainly, just like you were describing, like the reaction to the garbage there, let's say.
Right. I think that sort of you do have to change your language if you're writing for a very young audience, like Sesame Street audience or a picture book audience. You have to use simpler language, but you can still say a lot of kind of profound concepts, even if you use simple language. Right. And then when I wrote the young adult, it was easier because young adults can infer material, thoughts into what you're writing, and they you don't have to spell it out for them, I think, as much as for children.
Did you feel like you had to make a big step, or go a different way?
No, baby steps. I figure Sesame Street, picture books, young adult.
You see what I was saying? Because I thought, gee, well, it's a different take for you in a sense, but good, thanks.
Thank you.
Do you think you wrote the same way as you write for Sesame Street as you wrote in this book?
No, I think that there's more of my voice in this book, whereas when I write for Sesame Street, it's Oscar the Grouch's voice, or Elmo's voice, or Big Bird's voice. Though when I write for Sesame Street, I do write about real experiences. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, we used to go out on the stoop, and in the summer at night, and then my parents would say, okay, it's time to go up, and then my cousin would stay out, and I was sure that when they stayed out, something fabulous would happen, a big party would happen, and we were missing it. And then one day my mother said to me, this is for real, she said, okay, you can stay with your cousin. And I stayed, and you know what they did? They went home and didn't do anything exciting either. So when I grew up and I wrote for Sesame Street, I wrote a bit where Big Bird does not want to go to bed, and Susan and Gordon are saying, you have to go to bed, and he wants to stay up, and it was an imagination piece, and then he imagines clowns coming in and all this great stuff happening. and nothing happens. And then in Big Bird's story, Susan and Gordon say, okay, you can stay with me, stay up, and then they just watch the news. And Big Bird says, gee, my dreams are more exciting than this, you know. And he goes to bed. So that's like something that happened to me that I put in the Sesame Street stories. And then in my picture book, A Box Full of Kittens, it's about a girl who gets distracted from a big moment in her life because of kittens. And that also sort of happened to me. My aunt was pregnant, and they didn't have a phone. That's how long ago this was. So my mother says, go stay with her in case something happens. So I'm 10 years old, and I'm thinking, this is great. She's going to get pains, and I'm going to call the police, and the ambulance is going to come, and I'm going to be a hero. They're going to hold me up on their shoulders and everything. Well, nothing happened. You know, I just waited till her husband got home, and then he gave me a quarter, and I went home. But in my book, something happens. Actually, she misses the great moment to get the ambulance, and then she gets another prize in the end. So I do use my real experiences. No.
And also, last year when I was in 5th grade, me and my friend did a PowerPoint on Sesame Street. We had like a whole 5 pages on you.
A whole 5 pages of what?
On you.
Oh, good. What did you say?
Well, we were just saying on how writers change and puppeteers change, and like how you were a big influence on all the stories, and like how you use real experiences on Big Bird, especially because we did like the thing where Big Bird's friend passed away.
Oh, a Goodbye, Mr. Hooper?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. That was one of our greatest moments, was when we dealt with death in a way that nobody else had ever dealt with death with children.
Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. Keep writing.
First of all, I want to say thank you, because for a generation of women, I'm sure you hear this a lot, but for a generation of women, my age especially, you're the only person who looked like me on television. So thank you.
Thank you.
And my second question is the mother of a little person who now watches you, 30 years later. As a writer, how much of Sesame Street is written with the parents in mind who are going to be watching as well?
A lot of it. I mean, most of it is written. Our head writer used to tell us, you can put in any joke you can, as long as you're not excluding the kid. As long as the kid isn't looking at it and saying, what's going on there? Because we want the adult to watch with us, and we want the adult to have fun, and the adult to sort of, we're kind of winking at the adult, saying, I could see your little one is screaming for you. Yeah. But yes, we do write for the adult in mind. And I'm glad that you said that, about that you didn't see anybody who looked like you on television. I was born in the 50s, and I used to love television. I watched Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver. And I used to wonder how I could see hours and hours of television, never see anybody who looked like me or lived in a neighborhood that I lived in, or spoke like me. And if kids don't see people who look like them, they don't know how they're going to contribute to society that is blind to them. So I think that I sort of grew up to remedy something that was missing in my life. Though you can relate to people who are not like you very much. I loved A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I was just talking about that book, because in it, the family lies about where they live so they could get their kid into a better school district. And I remember families doing that in my neighborhood as well. So we have to reflect ourselves in society, but that doesn't mean you're not going to connect with somebody else's life.
And I have one quick more question. What's the writer's room like at Sesame Street?
Oh, the writer's room, it's everybody trying to outdo each other and crack each other up and try and be funnier than the next person. And that's how it is in the studio. And I made the mistake of thinking that every television studio was like that. And I had like a little part on Law and Order. And I tried to crack up Sam Waterston and did not go over well. They were very serious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Miss Sonia.
Hello.
First of all, I'm real upset with myself that I rushed down here seeing you when I left my DVD of Follow That Bird at home for you to sign. My first, well, I'm gonna combine these questions. First question is, do you see your literature set to screen, and what are your memories of Jim Henson?
I do see my literature set to street. If any of you guys want to make a movie of this, please do. And you know who's playing Abuela, the grandmother? Me. I mean, that would be wonderful. I was just at an event, the National Association of Hispanic Artists, and they were very concerned that there was not a lot of movies made about Latin people, and it's because of the box office. If it doesn't sell, they're not going to make the movies. But I'm convinced that Esai Morales wants to play Simon Bolivar. I think that's kind of what he was saying. And what was your second question? Oh, Jim Henson was a remarkable private person with a kind and zany sensibility. Whereas I would be concerned with the kids of the South Bronx or the kids in Manhattan or the kids right in front of me, he would be concerned with like the universe. And he was very kind, though not very gushy and open. And he had a mischievous streak through him. Whereas the early Jim Henson stuff that's like a little worm, and you pull on the worm, and then when you get to the end of it, it's this huge monster that is scary. And we do miss that a lot. I mean, because, you know, the way he looked at the world was very unique. Not too many people look at the world like that.
Hi, I just want to say I'm an adult, but I'm like freaking out because when I got here and saw that this was you, I've watched Sesame Street when I was a child. I'm just totally freaking out that Maria is here. I'm so glad I bumped into you because I didn't know that's who you were by the name. But I just wanted to say, you grew up in a different generation and there weren't a lot of opportunities. What did you want to be before you became what you became? And did you ever think it would be this big?
No, I wanted to be a secretary and have my own apartment. And to me, that was huge. I mean, I come from the times where girls did not leave their home until they were married. I mean, they you know, my cousins got engaged at 16 and married at 18, and that was sort of the way it went. So this was huge. And, you know, I only got into acting because it was the only way to go to college. Because I went from being an ace student in the inner city in the South Bronx, and when I got to performing arts, the Fame School, my grades went because I was competing with middle-class kids who went to great elementary schools. So the only way to get into college was to audition, like sports guys get into college nowadays. And this is an opportunity to say this. At that time, society was on my side to go to college. I mean, they were trying to diversify universities. They were giving cheap loans. I mean, everybody was pulling for you. The exact opposite of what's happening today. We're not helping kids get into college. We're making things harder for them to get into college. So that was on my side, and that's how I got into drama. But I think I would have been a writer. I mean, I love to act, and I'm a comic, but as I said, writing was very foreign to us. I can't believe what this has happened. I just fell into Sesame Street, and it was a perfect fit. I never wanted to leave. A lot of people went to Sesame Street and did not sink in, but I was happy that it did, and I followed my instincts.
And one other thing, can I have a picture with you before you leave?
Oh, probably on their way out if we can manage it.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
I'm actually a second grade teacher in the South Bronx,
Oh.
in an all-girls school. So my question is, what advice or what words of wisdom do you have for our young girls growing up?
Like, how old are they?
7 and 8, second grade.
Oh, they're just little babies.
Little
well,
girls.
You know, I mean, I think they should just have as much fun and try to experience things on their own. I think now what we're doing for kids is like we program them. Like they have to learn a certain amount of information so they can be tested. It's data. We want to fill them with data. In the old days, we used to nurture them so that they could find their own answers. Now we fill them with data, but if you nurture them, they will come up with stuff. I always think a teacher doesn't have to put her body of knowledge into the child. A teacher just has to point them and watch them fly, and they will exceed your expectations. Kids always, when you look into a bunch of kids and say, okay, who can sing and dance? They all raise their hand. If you say, hey, you, the cute one, turn around. Don't they all turn around? I mean, they're just there. They have that. And that's a good age to just keep that sort of open and going in their lives. Let them surprise you. Hey, buddy.
Hi.
Hi.
Where are you from?
I was born in New York City, raised in the Bronx, and my parents are from Puerto Rico. And they came to the New York City in the 40s, in the 1940s. Good question. And I'm from Sesame Street. Yep. Oh.
I had a quick question. I recently saw Sonia Sotomayor, and you do a piece together, and I'm from Washington Heights, and it seems like a lot of the really strong Latina women are from New York City. So is there like a pattern, or is there something in growing up that you see that has really helped you?
I think, actually, I wrote that bit for being Sonia. Yes, I'm very proud to say that the Justice was on Sesame Street, and I wrote that bit for her. Oh, she's terrific, you know, and we're working together on trying to get a Bronx Children's Museum open, and she's an example of someone. She said, when I was a kid, I always liked to know how things worked. She was like the more scientific kind of person. She used to love Nancy Drew books, and I used to love I Love Lucy. It's a good thing it wasn't the other way around and you have another kind of Supreme Court justice. I don't know that New Yorkers are in general tougher, I think, and more, you know, it's a fast city. There's public transportation, you're in the street all the time, you connect with one another. So I'd say that we probably are kind of, but no more than any other group. I think it's because we're New Yorkers. Thank you. Thank you.
What's it like to be on TV?
Well, it's great in that there's like 10 people beating my face into submission every time I get ready to be on television. I always think I look a little fatter on television than I think I am. But it's nice to see myself when I'm home and I don't expect to see myself, and there's a shot of me, and I kind of know what I really look like.
Okay, one more question. How do you get to Sesame Street?
Practice. No, Sesame Street is shot in Queens at the Kaufman Astoria Studios, where we also shoot Nurse Jackie, and the Bill Cosby Show is shot there. And these studios have been there since World War II. They did propaganda films on that. Believe me, it's nicer to watch it on television than to be there. Yep.
How do you, how do you dance?
How do I dance? With great difficulty. Are you referring to the Hola song where I'm dressed well like Ginger Rogers and I have a big feathery dress? There's people to help me dance and people to help me sing, and they tell me exactly what to do, and that's how I managed to dance on Sesame Street. I'm glad you didn't ask me how Elmo dances. Because that I wouldn't know the answer to that one.
Did they have Sesame Street when you were little?
Can somebody help her with that mic? Because you get it a little lower.
Did they have Sesame Street when you were little?
No, they did not have Sesame Street. They had a show called Romper Room, and the women used to say at the end of the show, I see Bobby and Darren and Mary, and I'm sitting there saying, well, how come she never says, I see Jose and I see Carmen? No, they didn't have Sesame Street when I was little. Thank you.
Okay, no. She wants to know whether Elmo likes pasta or strawberries.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure of the answer, but I would have to guess that he loves strawberries because they're red.
Sometimes he has fish.
Sometimes he has what? I'll tell him you said that. A shy question. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Well, like other people here, I was surprised to meet you because I'm from Jamaica and I grew up and I'm getting older now with Sesame Street. So I thought, well, maybe those characters that all die or those people. But I'm so happy to see you. Question for you. How long did you stay on Sesame Street?
I am still on Sesame Street. I'm still on Sesame Street. We're going into our 42nd year this summer, and I've been on the show for about 40 years.
Yeah, right.
So we're still there. It's very different than it was if you tune in now, but it's remarkable to me that we're still on the air. Americans don't like old things. They like new shows, and that we're still there is a remarkable thing.
Well, thank you for your time on Sesame Street.
Thank you. Okay, one more question, and I'm getting the hook.
What do you do on Sesame Street?
Well, clearly you've been living in a cave for, no. You're probably too old to watch Sesame Street now, but I play a character named Maria. And I talk to Elmo and Big Bird, and I'm one of the characters on the show. But never mind about that. Get this book. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me. The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, and I hope you like it. Adios. Gracias.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.